All right, so good evening from Washington, D.C., but depending on where you're watching it from, it could be good morning, good afternoon, completely different universe, whatever it is. This is the reality of the COVID era, but this is the newest iteration of NESA's ongoing IOR Digital Series. And tonight, we are tackling the topic of the Indo-Pacific. We have tended to focus on the heart of the Indian Ocean, but the Indo-Pacific concept is something that is increasingly talked about. And we are joined by someone who is deeply immersed in trying to navigate that concept and the various aspects of maritime security that exist in both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. We're joined by Mr. Blake Herzinger, who is currently with the Pacific Forum. He also was a former naval officer. He is an expert on security cooperation assistance, maritime security, and then seapower, and is focused on, and he has several upcoming projects, including a future book that will be released, which we will publicize, of course, Blake, whenever it comes out. So, Blake, before I turn it over to you, we're going to jump right into a question, and that is, the Indo-Pacific concept, as the United States sees it, differs substantially from what the Japanese see it as, what the Australians and the Indians define it as. Given how the United States frames it, it seems to be deeply tied to the idea of having immense ability to show off littoral and then obviously blue water power. So it's a naval idea. What in the media, in the broader sense, do you feel that people get wrong? What are some of the aspects of the Indo-Pacific concept and how it ties to maritime power that needs to be talked about with greater depth? If you could start us off with jumping into that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, perceptions of exactly what it is differ across the board, and I think we don't need to waste, as a nation, as a maritime nation, we don't need to waste too much time trying to align everyone's visions. I think it's important that everyone does have some kind of concept of what that is, and we all kind of agree that it is indeed a concept that we organize around. But for the United States in particular, the thing that I think we should really be cognizant of is that the world has changed beneath our feet with regard to the entire region, all the subregions. And our ability to project power into those regions is declining relative to our competitors. And our access is, I think, one of the key hinges of this entire concept, and we've kind of allowed our concept of access and our existing access to sort of march forward in this kind of zombie-like state, right? We haven't built new meaningful access for the U.S. Navy beyond kind of a phase 0 position. And so I think that's something that we really need to be emphasizing, is that we have peacetime access in place. But if we needed, real wartime access, I don't think we have that once you're past Japan. Really, between Bahrain and Japan, there's almost nothing. And that is a pretty scary proposition, because we're talking about a Navy that has been allowed to shrink to a critically small number of ships, and we don't have the ability to get those ships into a safe port once you're away from Japan or away from, the Arabian Gulf. And that's a pretty worrisome proposition for me as far as holding up our idea of the Indo-Pacific.
That's very interesting. I mean, very blunt, and honestly, I appreciate the assessment. We're going to build on that, but I kind of want to jump back a step, if you don't mind, and that is a lot of people who focus on the maritime domain, and I think we define ourselves as two people approaching it from different ways, but definitely focus on the maritime domain. Those types of individuals always talk about maritime domain awareness and interoperability and counter IUU fishing and counter illegal dumping, and that we're also the first ones that will bang the drum about worrying about these larger kind of strategic trends. How do those things connect? I think it's useful because our community kind of inherently gets it, but a lot of people don't. So how does stopping illegal fishing matter for this worrisome issue of a conflict breaking out, and suddenly the U.S. has to comprehensively change how it does what it does.
So that was, I had kind of two answers to that original question in my head, and the aspect of human security was kind of the other one that's kind of floating around. Human security is something the U.S. Navy is generally fairly uncomfortable with, right? We don't like doing the missions that are associated with human security, unless it is an emergency HADR scenario, in which case, you know, the Navy jumps in with both feet, we get it done, but then we jump out as quickly as we can. You know, we like to do short-term humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and then we like to stop and hand it over to USAID and the relevant organizations for doing that kind of thing. But when you look at most of the Indo-Pacific, once you're away from Northeast Asia, almost all of our allies and partners, their core focus of their militaries, law enforcement organizations are exactly that, these human security questions. You know, illegal fishing, as you said, human trafficking, and these are issues that their navies focus on day in and day out, and ours doesn't. So when we meet them in exercises, you know, they want to shoot missiles, they want to do the warfighting stuff, because that's, you know, navies enjoy doing those things. But when we talk to them about what are the relevant threats, and I think a lot of times folks from our Department of Defense go into engagements like that expecting to hear, we're really worried about China, we want you to help us with China. What they really say is, we are worried about our fisheries collapsing. And we're not in a position to respond to that, right? The naval officers are not trained on fisheries enforcement. When we have to do things like that, we bring the Coast Guard in, right? And so we're like, whoa, great. But would you rather just do some like diesel, you know, some turbine maintenance training, and then let's not talk about this non-traditional security stuff anymore? So I'm not a big fan of non-traditional security as a term, because in the Indo-Pacific, that is traditional security. That is security, right? If you're talking about things that affect the viability of the primary protein source of hundreds of millions of people, you are now talking about government stability. You are talking about regional stability. You know, when the South China Sea fisheries collapse, countries like Indonesia, with, you know, 300 million people, are going to be in dire straits. They're going to be in big trouble. And all of a sudden, like you said, you know, that link between something that we view as non-traditional security is going to become a very definite security challenge for us, because a key partner is going to have a population that is now, you know, completely focused on the fact that they don't have a primary food source. And the fact that around that, it's all grown into, you know, if you want to call it white hull competition, battles for the appearance of jurisdiction. That has all fed into this whole gray zone concept, and I don't necessarily ascribe to too much time spent on, you know, defining the gray zone, because I think it is sort of a function of warfare that we've seen throughout history. It's just China as a great power has really leaned into it, right? They've really focused on battling, you know, in this lawfare beneath the, you know, the threshold of armed conflict, and they are effectively showing their own jurisdiction over all of this, you know, maritime area, particularly in the South China Sea, and now pressing into the Indian Ocean as well. You know, China's been very clear that they cannot brook the Indians laying claim to the Indian Ocean. You know, they said the last thing we want is for that to become an actual Indian Ocean. So I think we can expect things like a continued challenge to, you know, regimes of international law, and we have to become comfortable operating in that space. And I think we are still not quite there on how we conceptualize that and how we approach it from a naval standpoint.
That's incredibly helpful. I mean, a lot of our engagements at the NESA Center are with our partners and allies throughout the region. And they crave kind of insight into how American strategy or American theories are put into policy. So let's dive into the kind of the huge problem set that, at least from the point of view of Indo-PACOM, and everyone focused on the Indo-Pacific, and that is the problem sets associated with China. Almost uniformly in DC, where I'm based, these conversations focus on the very, very 30,000 feet, as General Wolf, my boss, likes to talk about it, issues. So the overarching bilateral relationship, the overarching economic relationship, the overarching strategic and security competitive footing. But when you get in the actual region, it's much different. So you mentioned that the U.S. fleet, that the U.S. Navy is sort of seen, the perception is that the U.S. is a diminishing power comprehensively, and it's also a diminishing naval power. If you had your say, or if you wanted to target key issues that needs greater attention, what would those be to restore sort of U.S., not supremacy, but the necessary U.S. Footprint in the region on a maritime basis that you would like to see?
So I think you raised a couple of really great points there, Jeff. And I come across sometimes as a contrarian, and I know I've ruffled feathers before. Like I'm just not. I don't pull my punches, and it's not because it's all out of love, right? It's because I want us to be better. But I think our 30,000 foot view is often just really dated, right? It's been a long time since we focused on the Indo-Pacific. It's been 20 years since we thought seriously about this region. Unfortunately, once you get outside of the Strait of Hormuz, or south of Japan, here be dragons. That's the edge of the map all of a sudden. The only big Navy news to come out of here in the last 20 years is the Fat Leonard scandal. It's not been a series of grand successes for us, unfortunately. So we have to get serious in the way that we approach this region, and we have to update our mindset, right? We have to consider what the facts on the ground are now. The South China Sea, it's not lost, but China has essentially presented us with a fait accompli. I think everyone, at least internally somewhere, accepts that. We're not rolling those islands back. They're not going away short of armed conflict. We have to start thinking about the region. If we want to think about it holistically and simultaneously as subregions, we have to get serious about engaging the region on its own merits. Because I think there's a very powerful impression in the Indian Ocean and in Southeast Asia that we consider this the place where we are going to confront China. And nobody wants their backyard to be a U.S.-China battlefield. Right? I think that proposition is pretty unattractive to most countries. And they are more interested in how we're going to be present economically. They're more interested in how we are going to engage constructively. And there has to be a balance, obviously, of expectations there, because it's not easy for some countries in the region to say, yes, we want U.S. security support, but they're going to continue to want economic ties with China. And that is not something we can push them away from. If we force that choice on people, I don't think the United States will like the answer, right? We won't like the outcome if we force a choice. And that, I think emotionally, that's a very unrewarding proposition, right? Nobody wants to hear, yes, you are going to provide the security guarantee and the regions are going to continue trading with your primary competitor. But that is reality, right? We're not going to stop trading with China either. We're going to decouple in the areas where we can and where it makes sense to do so. But trade with China and the U.S. will continue. So why expect Indonesia to stop? I mean, things like CATSA, I have my own views on the use of CATSA, but we have to recognize that Indian Ocean region, Southeast Asian countries, traditionally Russia is a primary defense supplier. So if you're going to force them away from buying things like the S-400, you have to make sure they have a cost competitive option in place. we can't just say, no, you can't buy Russian equipment, and then say, well, good luck buying a next-gen air defense system. Find one somewhere else. You can no longer buy from the number 2 and number 3 defense suppliers in the world, and you can't afford the United States, so best of luck. That's not, we have a hard time, or we're having a hard time, I think, getting past the stick, and we don't have enough carrot in the region. I mean, we're presenting these security challenges. Evan Feigenbaum has put it really effectively, and I really like his framing. The United States runs the risk of becoming the Hessians of Asia, right? We don't have an attractive economic proposition because we're not part of CPTPP. RCEP obviously doesn't involve us. So the economic rules of the region have proceeded without us. The likelihood of building direct bilateral trade agreements is low. And what we have to offer is a security guarantee without the economic benefit. So I think we have to be realistic about where our approach is attractive and where it's not. And I think sometimes we can be a bit repellent with the way we treat that. And I think that requires a lot of awareness. Obviously the Department of Defense is not an economics department, but we have to recognize that no one wants a U.S.-China conflict playing out in their backyard.
Incredibly well said. And thanks for the Evan quote. I had not heard him say that, which is very fascinating to hear. I think you point to one of the problem sets that the U.S. Department of Defense faces in the Indo-Pacific, and that is, while other U.S. government entities are there and present, we still have the State Department with its embassy teams who do great work on a bilateral basis. You have the multilateral teams that deal with, international regimes that govern various things. But really, it seems like the actors that are most commonly present is DoD. It's partially related to our size and partially related to our relationships. What is your answer there? Because you're right, because DoD is not gonna talk about economics. I mean, we surely will, but we have no expertise in this. So it seems that you're alluding to, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but it seems that you're alluding to the China challenge is a whole of society challenge for the United States, and we are not treating it as so. Would that be accurate in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is some recognition of that starting to grow. I think it was Eric Sayers who, was on Twitter, but he said, there's no department in the U.S. government that doesn't have something to contribute now towards this challenge. You are not the Secretary of Energy. You are the Secretary of Energy and China. You're the Deputy Undersecretary, for South Asia, but you're also, you have to be thinking, how does my department or my little corner of, this garden, how does it pertain to China? And defense, I think we could do better with thinking, how do our actions impact what everyone else is doing? And thinking more interagency, which, we don't always have to, because defense is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We have a huge budget. We are forward all the time. But thinking holistically, for defense, I think the easiest first step is thinking, okay, well, if we can't necessarily apply strictly military thinking or assets to a problem, our most immediate recourse, especially for Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia, why aren't we involving the Coast Guard more? I mean, the first answer is the Coast Guard's budget doesn't support that. And traditionally, they're not here, and obviously it's the U.S. Coast Guard. So for a lot of people, that causes like this paradigm collapse, and they don't want to hear it. I don't want to see American white hulls forward. Okay, well, if you don't want to send the ships past the South Pacific, send personnel. We've done some great training with the Coast Guard in Southeast Asia. Make that more broad. Get into the Indian Ocean region, send training teams, build relationships, consider some shipwriter agreements, like we've done elsewhere. We've done off the coast of Africa. We've done it. We've had Coast Guard agreements with China. Obviously there's potential there. We have to fund it though, obviously. And DoD can fund those. We've funded Coast Guard presence in Fifth Fleet for 20 years. So we could do it here. We just have to want to. And we talked earlier about, security cooperation. we talk about the Indo-Pacific as a priority theater, but that is comes with the caveat of we spend more on security cooperation basically anywhere you look than in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. If you look at the Indo-Pacific in terms of security assistance, and then look at Ukraine, we've poured more security assistance into Ukraine than we have in the whole of the Indian Ocean, like some years. I mean, it's crazy. And obviously those are national priorities, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that we publish those numbers, right? We say priority theater, and then we publish those numbers, and people are like, wait a minute, like you've spent more in Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, God knows where else. I'm encouraged by the talk of PDI and where we're going with the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. That's great, or Indo-Pacific Deterrence Initiative, now PDI. And I hope we can get the same kind of juice there that we've had with EDI, in Europe. But again, people in the Pacific see, wait, you had a pivot to the Pacific, but you had a European deterrence initiative where you poured billions into Europe yearly, year on year for quite a few years. But we haven't had one here, and now we're still struggling to really get people on board with a PDI, right? And it's kind of like, it's hard to argue against the facts that we publish ourselves. We don't tell our own story well. I think we need to do better, and we need to maximize the advantages we do have. We talk about maritime awareness. There's plenty we can do there. The Indo-Pacific Maritime Security Initiative has been a good start. Plenty more to do there, and now. I think there's some really interesting things happening, particularly that are starting in the Indian Ocean region and moving towards Southeast Asia that are EU-led. The EU is very involved in maritime awareness. So we need to be thinking about where our interests align there and how we can cooperate and maximize Europe's contributions to the Indo-Pacific as well.
You're hitting a lot of spots that I think, honestly, revealing my own bias, that I completely agree with. I'm going to put a pin in one of the bigger questions I have, because I know you'll be honest, and I know it's a sticky issue within the DoD. But I think it's useful for our partners in the region to understand, how we always talk that if people want to understand China, look at internal Chinese politics. If you want to understand India, you have to look inside Indian politics. The same is true of the United States. We have our budget wars. We have our partisanship. We have our federal system, which is insane for most foreign observers. But let me get to the perception issue, which, I mean, this is something no matter what framework, what meeting you have. But if you're an American and you're engaging with, whoever it is, someone, a delegation from Thailand, a delegation from Saudi Arabia, a delegation from Madagascar, inevitably there's this perception that the U.S. doesn't, we're losing out to the Chinese and the Russians or any other myriad of other actors, that if they do the smallest thing, they throw a parade, where we have kind of taken on the perception that we try to keep everything under the radar, which I think is an overreaction to some of the backlash during the GWAT, where we didn't want to have our fingerprints on things. But now, I mean, with MSI, perfect example, had a lot of success, is continuously grown, has now moved into the Bay of Bengal. It's not talked about openly in a lot of forums. The same is true of the formation of different things in Oceania, different mechanisms, all the various minilaterals and trilaterals and bilaterals insanity that goes on inside of ASEAN states because of the particular political complications there. Why? I guess is my question. You may not have the answer, but why, in your mind, do you think that we're so bad at this?
So I think that's a multi-pronged answer. One, I'll lead with the one that should make us feel the best, because I don't think it's all our fault. I think some of that sensitivity has been in response to partner requirements. Talking specifically about MSI, when we first announced it, there were problems with our announcement. We put some partners in a bad spot with the way that we did that, and that, I think, was a reflection of we weren't familiar with the region anymore. We thought that we were considered a net good, hey, the US is back, awesome, hey, we're going to jump right in here with this South China Sea initiative, and we're going to help you guys secure the water. And the South China Sea claimants were like, nope, not interested. You have framed out for us an anti-China coalition. You have used all the wrong words, and we don't want that money. We cannot touch that with a barge pole. Like, China will flatten our economy if we take your money with this South China Sea initiative. And I think that was a big surprise in the US government, unfortunately. And it shouldn't have been. That should not have been a surprise. And so I think that's why after the first really year, you saw a recalibration of what that initiative looked like. We renamed it. It took on a less overtly anti-China stance. And with some of those countries, we started providing assistance under the radar. And that was to avoid the appearance of us pulling them, or trying to pull them into this anti-China coalition. Because that is one of maybe the underappreciated facts in USG more broadly. We're not going to get Southeast Asia on board with anything that looks anti-China. It just will never happen. Everyone's like, yeah, Vietnam's really coming around. We pull carriers in there. They bought kilos. Yeah. And yeah, they fought a war, with China in the 70s. They're not interested in an anti-China, ideological conflict. They are interested in balancing. They don't want China coming over their border. They don't want China raiding their fisheries, but they also want to continue their economic relationship. And China has leverage there, and they will use it. So we have to get away from this paradigm of like getting countries on side against China, because it's just not going to happen. And we turn partners off of cooperating with us when we do talk about it that way. And then with regard to kind of more broadly being able to effectively toot our own horn, we got away from putting, a gift from the United States of America on aid, right? Because we were sending it into places like Burma. We were okay with kind of being this anonymous donor, and China doesn't do that, right? When China sends, 5 doctors to Serbia to help them with COVID, they make signs, and these doctors get off the plane holding signs like, I'm from China and I'm here to help. We have to tell the story both at home and abroad of why Asia is important to us, why the Indo-Pacific is important, why it matters to the taxpayer, and then we can better tell our story in the region. We are still most of the region's primary source of foreign direct investment. We have provided a security guarantee for the, really undergirded the long Asian peace. Our public affairs, especially from the Navy, we're just tweeting out pictures of gun X's. That's not doing us any favors. It's unsophisticated, right? It's just not what people are looking for from us. And I think that's a perception issue. We don't necessarily know. And if we do know, we don't care, I guess, what the region actually wants from us. We're like, yeah, okay, great. I hear you, you don't want to see the US-China competition in your backyard, but I'm just going to keep posting pictures of, amphibs with Marines shooting handguns on the deck. And I'm sure that will translate into more soft power for the United States. We should be leaning into things like, the East-West Center research on why Asia matters for America, right? Here are all the things we do here. And find a way to talk about those things without it just sounding like reading off a list of the things we invest in, and finding new places to cooperate, helping countries secure their fisheries, and finding ways to matter beyond, the hard security issues that we like to focus on. Because we have limited ourselves, and I think we are fenced in by our own expectations and our own vision of the region. Talking about coming from NESA, we talk a lot about trying to develop, China hands in the Navy. We want people to have had operation or, some kind of on the ground experience in China. Where are our India FAOs, right? Like, why aren't we talking about South Asia expertise? We have to build real expertise and not just, yeah, I made my bones because I, published a few proceedings articles talking about how bad China is. Okay, but tell me why that matters to Bangladesh, tell me why what you're saying matters to Indonesia. Do you understand what the Indonesians think about China? You know, like, do you understand how they view the security dynamic there? I think there's a shortfall in understanding. And we're a superpower at the end of the day. You know, sometimes what a country thinks, you know, country X thinks about how things are going, we don't have the luxury of caring. But in some places, we could be adjusting our views. We could be adjusting how we operate. And we're kind of leaning away from making those choices right now, I think.
I don't disagree. I mean, the incident that always kind of pops in my head is the one time we got it right, and I think we got it right by accident, is after the 2014 typhoon in the Philippines, when the carrier strike group came in. Like, it was comprehensive, overwhelming, like, positive response. Like, everyone sends, you know, warmest regards, here's a little bit of aid, and then the U.S. bombards with humanitarian assistance, just like in those heavy-handed. But the media coverage and the way that it was presented to the world was very effective. But it seems like we didn't learn that lesson. I get your point. But bringing up some of the things I know you've said in other forums, one of the issues that for the NESA Center, since we cover pretty much the entirety of the Indian Ocean from east to west, obviously we cross over 3 seams between 3 combatant commands: AFRICOM, CENTCOM, and Indo-Pacom. All of them face their own challenges, but part of the issue is this. In essence, what we have tracked, what I have kind of been banging the drum on, is that increasingly from this region, we're not getting shopping lists. The U.S. security cooperation is not, hey, we need this many tanks, this many fast attack craft, this much ammunition. It's more, we need to better use what we already have. And so we need your training. So we're getting more calls for professional military education, interoperability, whole of society engagements to tackle problems, better communication methodologies to report things like IUU. And it seems to be that increasingly the American expertise in terms of the high-level, highly educated, kind of technologically addressed kind of operations is what we're getting as a request. But there hasn't seemed to be an inevitable response on the U.S. side of things. That it's still kind of the same old, same old. How would you? What sort of things would you target? I mean, you've highlighted what we should do, but what's something practical that we could do right now to get smarter on these sorts of things? How could you help me, for instance, with trying to communicate this to the various people that I'm working with, that, hey, you've got a lot of people who want this, and this isn't a big ask. Why aren't we doing it? What's something practical that you'd recommend?
So part of that, I think, is an internal look at how we handle and how we view security cooperation and security assistance, right? General Hooper, former or retired General Hooper, former commander, yeah, at DSCA, just published a piece, I think, for the Atlantic Council, and he talked about existing issues in security cooperation, but I found myself by the end really unsatisfied, because really he was just talking about how our system of getting gear to places is too slow. You know, we're not responsive enough, and like you said, that is kind of an old, to me, an old way of looking at this, because we have handed out, you know, boatloads of gear over the years, and a lot of it has just withered and rusted, because we didn't have an effective tail built in for maintenance and continued training. I think we've started to address some of that, but you're right on the money in that a lot of countries have things already. You know, they have the things. They want the expertise. They want the training, and this is a ground up effort, right? This is institution building. It's helping build a permanent cadre of maintenance personnel in Bangladesh to service the boats we give them. You know, not just training some random guy every year. You know, whoever shows up to this training, we're going to teach them how to maintain an engine. It doesn't work, because that guy then leaves the Navy, and then we have to retrain another guy the next year. You know, And then thinking about small wins, what could we do everywhere? You know, commercially available maritime domain awareness information is everywhere. You know, satellite data that rivals, you know, our most secret capabilities is now for sale. You know, you can buy Planet Labs data, you can buy Maxar data. We have to think about how we adjust our systems to say, like, hey, what does everyone need? They need, you know, synthetic aperture radar coverage of their EEZ. They need effective access to things like, you know, we offer Sea Vision. The EU is offering, you know, it's a different system, but IORIS. Thinking about how we can modernize ourselves to maximize commercially available stuff and build our own expertise, because I don't think the US government has a lot of expertise in working open source, working with commercial tools. We have to master those things and find a way to get them into our partners' hands, because that's something we can do. You know, you should be able to flip a switch and show up at the IFC IOR in India and help them see what's out there. Help them to help Sri Lanka, you know, be comfortable working through another partner as well. You know, hey, India, we want you to really be the hub here, right? So how can we help you? How can we work through you to offer, you know, commercially available stuff? And it's cheap and it's quick, and we have to get agile to do that.
That's very practical. In fact, you know, that's something very specific. I mean, I've been amazed by the fact that you can rent satellite time. It just kind of, I'm a child of the '80s, so to me, satellites are still like something that, like, you know, I'm thinking of Star Wars, you know, the Reagan-esque era program and things like that. And now suddenly you can rent space for not that much money. You know, it might even be something that, you know, even NESA could, you know, and organizations in DoD that have a little bit more flexibility could experiment with and see how it goes. But you know, we've talked a lot, and I mean, honestly, I could keep you here for a few more hours. But you're starting your day. My day's wrapping up. I want to end with two final questions. Let's do the first one. That, in some ways, I think may be the easiest, the most direct question, but the hardest one to answer, and that is, we have to prioritize when you're dealing with security issues. And, you know, whether it be what theater we're interested in, whether it be what tool we're going to use, we have to prioritize. So for you, what of the strategic issues that are in the Indo-Pacific, what is the number one trend line that you would scream from the rooftop of your building that everyone should be paying attention to?
We need to figure out how to apply ourselves more effectively. You know, every day we lose influence because we're not playing the game that everyone in the region wants us to play. We can be here with our ships as much as we want. We have less ships every year. Unfortunately, like, just the recapitalization of the fleet is not happening fast enough. We have to figure out how to engage effectively at all levels and meet partners where they're at. You know, we will not lead a grand anti-China crusade. The Quad is a worthy initiative, but we have to start engaging partners where they are. You know, rather than expecting them to come on board balancing China with us. And if we're not comfortable with that, then we should, you know, okay, well, if you're not comfortable with that, then there are things that you will not achieve. So we have to be, I think the trend is, I think we're trending away from realism, and we have to get pretty realistic about what is possible. And if we want to succeed, there will be sacrifices that we have to make, and there will be hard decisions made. Budgets, personnel, and actual priorities. You know, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So right now, I don't think we could point to the Indo-Pacific and credibly say it's our priority theater.
Yes, certainly. I mean, you know that given the area of responsibility NESA has, you know that those questions come up routinely. But I see your point, and it's well taken. In fact, you know, the thing I always try to argue is that, you know, the U.S. can build connections. We can build a network of people and institutions that are connected together. And then if we actually respond to the signals we're getting, then those countries are going to be partners because they're going to be acting in adherence to the rules and norms, which is really what I mean, yeah, those are U.S. rules and norms that we promoted back, 70, 75 years ago. But that's still kind of our objective. And so, I kind of share the mindset. But the final thing is, we're still, I mean, it doesn't seem, given the past COVID year where time is warped and sped up and slowed down, we're only 3 months into a new administration. And we continuously get questions from our friends in our region that we cover. What is going to be the president's priorities? What is President Biden focused on? What are the administration priorities? Part of that is still being determined. It's a new administration. So for you, if you had the 30-second elevator pitch, what policy would you champion? What is the kind of thing that you would want to emphasize to Secretary Blinken or Secretary Austin or someone on the NSC if you had the opportunity?
So this is something that I think some people in the Biden administration are already pushing toward. So I think I would be reinforcing something, and to really shut down an argument that I see more and more. The United States will shatter itself on the rocks if we pursue some, yesteryear idea of dominance, overmatch, this, one-to-one clash of the titans with China. We're in a tough spot. We are in a tough spot. And there is no scenario that I see in the near term where I've seen people calling for spending China into oblivion, this Cold War-esque effort to crush the Chinese Communist Party. Like, that is a drastic misconception of the balance of power in the Western Pacific. What is reasonable is, just like you said, leveraging American strengths, things like a values-based approach, things like reinforcing the rules-based order, to create a region where China's rise does not flip the table over, right? We can dilute their influence. We cannot counter and crush it into the dust. That will not happen. But we can help to lead a region in which our values are at the forefront. Our perception of, our concept of universalist international law prevails. And we do that by lifting our partners and strengthening them into a resilient network that can absorb and dilute Chinese power. Because China is going to, we're going to see where they go. They're going to hit the middle income trap. We'll see if they come out the other side. They may or may not. But regardless, they are a massive power. They wield incredible economic influence. As you said, COVID has changed a lot of things. It's even caused some reconsideration in China, I think. But we can't make this just about us, right? We have to work in the region to rebuild a real network that is resilient and flexible, that China can't break. And we won't get there with chest beating. We won't get there with a head-to-head confrontation. And I think that attitude is shared at many levels of the Biden administration. But I would just reinforce that and push back on those that seem to want this ideological competition that ends with, the U.S. and China running headlong at each other with no off-ramp. And I don't see that as, anti-American. I don't think anyone wants to see World War III between the U.S. and China. We don't have to shy away from risk. We have to improve the ways that we do force some of that risk onto the Chinese, absolutely. But we are not going to get there with a head-to-head confrontation in our partner's backyard.
That's very well said. And I also, if I could add one thing to what you just said, also the curse and the opportunity that is associated with time. I think some people who take on these dire prognostications, they're getting the time wrong. I mean, China is a long-term challenge. It is not an immediate, sharp challenge that has to be withstood or a wall's going to impede. And you see this with the BRI. When the BRI was first announced in 2014, I said, listen, yes, this is a comprehensive big thing. But half of these projects were founded by Hu Jintao. This is not Xi Jinping's projects, and they're going to run out of money far quicker than people think they will. And already, maybe COVID, spurred that on quicker, but already everyone's talking about how much the sieve of funding is slowing down, and much more logical, transparent, traditional financing opportunities are being established. This free-for-all of 2 or 3 years ago is no longer realistic. It wasn't even realistic then. But that's a conversation for another time. I'm going to put a pin in it. Blake, thank you so much for your time. I know your day's getting started, so I appreciate you getting up a little early and mainstreaming some coffee to get yourself ready for today. We will certainly have you back, and we look forward to future iterations. But again, just thank you so much, and take care of yourself.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.